Let's talk about Jorginho. Champion of Europe at both club and international level, UEFA Player of the Year for 2021. He's won trophies in every country he's played in. But let's scrap all that. This video is going to be a bit different to normal. I don't want to tell you about stats and trophies, instead I want to have a conversation with you as a viewer. So before we get any further in this video, I want you to comment what your opinion on Jorginho is, whether you think he's overrated or underrated, what his pros and cons are, and so forth. Have a second or two to pause the video while you comment. Now on to my opinion on him. Jorginho is undeniably a unique footballer in today's game. Often compared to Sergio Busquets, I myself am not too confident in making that comparison, although I do think there is aspects of Jorginho's game that is similar. But putting that point on hold for a moment, there's one particular thing that makes Jorginho so different to the likes of Busquets: his public perception. Jorginho is one of the most prominent players who has suffered and continues to suffer what I call the Firmino Syndrome. Now, what is the Firmino Syndrome, I hear you ask? Well, I don't actually hear you ask, and believe it or not, I can't actually hear you guys through a YouTube screen. Anyways, the Firmino Syndrome is when a player finds himself underrated and more so underappreciated for a long period of time, before seemingly overnight, calling him underrated becomes the only thing football fans want to do. Then following this ridiculous number of people calling him underrated, in a significantly short period of time the player goes from being genuinely underrated to massively overrated, largely by people who don't actually know why the player was underrated in the first place. After a month or so of being overrated, the football world splits in two, in which half of the fans instantaneously despise the player, leading him to becoming both underrated and overrated all at the same time, with nobody really understanding the aspect of the play which makes them good, and just simply stating that they're a great player without really knowing why they are. With Firmino, those who loved him would rave about how hard he works, and for Jorginho, it was simply good at passing, innit? At this point, I kind of waffled for a little while, so let me pull the actual useful information out of the last minute or so. I think it's undeniable that at some point over the last 2 years, Jorginho has been both overrated and underrated. So if you were to have actual evidence to back it, and as long as it's not heavily to either side of the spectrum, any opinion on Jorginho could be correct. I actually asked you guys for your opinions on Jorginho. Some of them were a little harsher than others, and didn't particularly make any sense. But like I said, if you guys had more of a platform to actually give some evidence, I'm sure I'd be able to agree and understand a little bit more. The reason I bring this up is that a good portion of you seem to be in agreement that Jorginho finds himself in the weird space of being both underrated and overrated, which links into that whole Firmino point I made. And there's one key reason for this: the fact that there's a lot of myths around what he's good and bad at. I think a lot of people tend to call him this elite passer, and don't get me wrong, his passing is great, and I don't think there's anybody in this Chelsea squad that could replace the role he currently plays. But when about a year ago we were seeing comparisons to the likes of Pirlo, I can understand why some may call him overrated. But on the other hand, there's aspects of his game which are so wildly underrated and have gone near unnoticed. With Jorginho, there's two major cons that you often hear as to why he's not such a good player. Firstly, that he's just a system player who's lucky to find himself in a team that works for him, and that his brilliant 2021 calendar year was down to the excellence of players like Kante and Barella. Look, I'm going to come out and say it. I may or may not have thought this about a year ago, but since then I've seen the light and realised I was wrong. I'm sorry to anybody who still agrees with that statement, but it's absolute shit. Now I'm going to make a statement that might be equally as controversial as the one I've just disagreed with. But after looking a little bit closer into Jorginho, I can truly say that I believe he's one of the most adaptable and versatile players in the world right now. Fine, I'll give you a few seconds to write your hate comments. Now, players like Fede Valverde or Joshua Kimmich are probably players that come to mind when you think of those that are versatile. They're both hard-working and strong enough technically to play out wide or further forward on the pitch, whilst also having a good enough understanding of the game around them to play in midfield. So if you're using the likes of Valverde and Kimmich to decide what adaptable should mean, then of course Jorginho doesn't find himself in the same category. But being able to play different positions isn't the sole deciding factor as to whether a player is adaptable or not. Rather than finding himself everywhere and anywhere across the pitch, Jorginho's adaptability finds itself in the form of his ability to perform in various styles of play in which he has different responsibilities. Jorginho being able to play in different systems is very impressive, and makes the argument that he's nothing more than a system player sound absolutely ridiculous. Rather than looking at it as Jorginho being lucky to play in Chelsea's Champions League winning system, in my opinion, it was the brilliance of Jorginho that actually allowed Chelsea to play the way they did. Without Jorginho, Kante wouldn't have been able to roam further forwards and win Chelsea the ball higher up the pitch. But to be fair, Kante did also aid Jorginho in areas he may be weaker in. But arguably most importantly, Jorginho allowed Rudiger to be more aggressive and more physically dominant through the spaces Jorginho occupied. Now at this stage, I do understand it might sound like I'm waffling, especially because I've not actually given any visual evidence or any real substance behind my words. But sadly, because this is a company account and with all sorts of copyright rules, I can't actually show any footage or screenshots of games where I could explain what I'm talking about. But like I said, this is a conversational video, not analytical. So feel free to still disagree with what I've said in the comments because I do actually want to hear what you've got to say. Also, it helps to boost the video regardless. So yeah, I couldn't really show any evidence for my point, but my point was more that adaptability and versatility isn't just to do with the number of positions a player can play in. Now onto the second point I wanted to talk about, that Jorginho isn't good at defending. This statement has got a bit more substance to it in my opinion. Now in my opinion, it is generally a lot harder to see if a midfield player is good or bad at defending in comparison to someone like a centre half. But what's clear is that Jorginho's tackling, for example, may not be on the level of something like his ability to keep the ball moving constantly, which is obviously one of his bigger positives. But the main problem I've got with the point is that firstly, defending isn't just crunching tackles and heading away crosses. There's so much more to it. As the Italians like to say, defending is an art, and making aggressive slide tackles isn't the only part of a solid defence. Seeing as I've already brought up the art analogy, the way I view it is that tackles are like the paint in a piece of art. Sure, it's what you notice and is arguably the most important and notable part of a painting, but without the canvas behind it, paint would be completely useless. And to me, Jorginho's role is like the canvas. What I'm saying is that just because he isn't the most aggressive, dominant defender, doesn't mean he's bad at defending. Jorginho's reading of a game and his ability to watch a transition of play in front of him, understanding where the space may open up and then moving into said space, often forces opposition players into duels, and sometimes even 2 or 3v1s against defenders, where Chelsea more often than not are able to win the ball back. Also, I did emphasise a lot on the fact that Jorginho's tackling isn't exceptional, but it's really not bad. Now I'm about to bring up some stats, which I understand really don't tell the full story, but they do still aid conclusions you can get from watching a player, so please just skip 20 seconds if you're very anti-statistics. Jorginho finds himself in the 86th and 87th percentile when it comes to tackles and interceptions per 90 this season in the Prem. And like it or not, he's really not that bad at tackling. Now let me conclude. I've established that in my opinion, Jorginho is both underrated and overrated depending on who you're talking to. But as you can see from the poll I did, more people seem to think he's overrated, which not only probably means he's not overrated, but is also quite unfair. There's a reason why every manager he's played under loves him. Yes, he is a player with flaws, but most of the time his flaws aren't actually pointed out, and instead the general footballing public nitpick at tiny aspects of his game without looking at the bigger picture in terms of what may have happened had he not made that decision, which to me doesn't really make sense. I also spoke about the Firmino effect, or theory, or whatever I called it. And so if you're watching and think you may have actually been part of that effect for any player, maybe stop, or keep doing it because I don't really care at all. It is your life. Now as I write this script, there was one more thing I wanted to talk about which I've somehow forgotten. But if I can remember it by the time I finish editing, I'll put it in now. Okay, I don't think I remembered it in time. Oh well, not the end of the world. Like I said, I really made this video as a gateway for conversation with you guys in the comments. Make sure you do comment if you've got a thought that's even slightly related to this video, because I'll be replying to pretty much every comment I see, and I want to interact with you more as viewers. The next video on this channel by me should actually be next Thursday, which will be another video essay / documentary type video. So comment down below what you want to see. I'm open to doing a World Cup video or just a general football video, so literally any comment is useful. Because at the end of the day, I enjoy making the video regardless, so whatever you want to see is what I'll make. Now with that long outro conclusion thing out of the way, I'm just going to say bye now. No, I'm not actually. Like and subscribe but once. You